Jamal Winslow had seen countless traffic stops in his years as an assistant U.S. attorney, but nothing could prepare him for the strange turn his life was about to take. It was late at night in Baton Rouge. He had just left dinner with colleagues. Thoughts of the case he was piecing together swirling in his mind. The streets were quiet, the occasional hum of traffic lights punctuating the silence. Just as he was thinking about how nice it would be to kick off his shoes and relax at home, the flashing red and blue lights of a police vehicle appeared in his rearview mirror. Sighing, Jamal turned on his blinker, signaling to pull over as curiosity mixed with unease. His heart raced slightly. He hadn't done anything wrong. He had obeyed every traffic law, yet something about the encounter felt foreboding. As he reached for his wallet, he could hear the muted sounds of the night around him, the faint chirp of crickets, the hum of air conditioning units. And for a moment, he hoped against hope this would be just another quick stop. Two officers approached his vehicle. Officer Kyle Driscoll stood at the driver's side, tall and imposing with a military buzz cut that screamed authority. His face was stern and unreadable, eyes hidden behind a pair of dark sunglasses that reflected the flashing lights behind him, a persistent reminder of the tension that coiled within the air. Officer Brent Kessler hovered near the passenger door, leaner but equally intimidating, his demeanor radiating a sense of menace that cautioned Jamal at once. "License and registration," Driscoll demanded, his voice clipped and devoid of any warmth. Jamal complied, reaching into the glove compartment for his documents. "May I ask why I was stopped?" he inquired, a composed edge to his tone. He wasn't about to let fear take over. Driscoll exchanged a quick glance with Kessler, who folded his arms as if already prepared for a fight. "Your tail lights out." A frown creased Jamal's forehead. "That's not true. My car just passed inspection." He glanced at his rearview mirror, where everything appeared in working order. "Are you sure about that?" he asked, keeping his voice steady. There was no reason for this stop. Jamal acutely sensed something was off. Driscoll's expression shifted imperceptibly, the slightest tightening of his jaw, before he leaned closer. "Sir, step out of the vehicle." Panic lanced through Jamal. Years of prosecuting cases like this flooded his mind, tales of seemingly mundane stops escalating into chaos. His instinct told him to comply, yet his experience warned of a dangerous game. "I'm not stepping out until you tell me why," he replied firmly, determined not to show fear. Kessler's smirk deepened, a self-satisfied grin that suggested he relished the control. "Because we said so." Jamal's took a breath, his heart pounding not with fear, but with burgeoning anger. He had spent years fighting for justice, upholding the very laws these officers were bending and breaking. "I'm within my rights to ask why I'm being ordered out of my car." Driscoll's patience snapped. In one swift motion, he yanked the door open, the metal creaking ominously. "Step out now," he barked. Before Jamal could process the unfolding scenario, Driscoll grabbed his wrist, yanking him forward with surprising brutality. The seatbelt caught him across the chest, the suddenness of the action leaving him momentarily dazed. "What the hell are you doing?" he barked, instinctively pulling back, anger igniting in his chest. Kessler appeared at his side, wrenching Jamal's arm behind his back with a grip that punctured the veneer of control. The cuffs snapped into place around his wrists, the metal biting into his skin as the world spun in disbelief. "You're resisting," Driscoll stated coldly, as if that explained everything. Jamal stared at them, disbelief giving way to a growing fury. He had fought predators and criminals in court, but now the predator was cloaked in the blue of authority, and he was the collateral damage. As they pressed him against the hood of his own car, the weight of indignity washed over him, and he couldn't swallow the rage. This was a setup, a cruel game, and they believed they had already won. The East Baton Rouge Parish Courthouse was bustling with the aura of routine, the air thick with paperwork and whispered conversations. Yet beneath that hum was a simmering current of tension, the kind that had become too familiar for Jamal. Today, as he sat at the defense table, he was no longer the attorney but the defendant, facing charges built on the foundation of petty lies. The courtroom was pulsing with an underlying disquiet, anticipation hanging thick in the air as if everyone sensed a boiling point was near. Judge Margaret Holloway presided over the courtroom with an air of authority that was both imposing and dismissive. Her sharp gaze flickered down at Jamal, missing the depth of the situation surrounding him. She had the power to dictate the fate of so many, yet Jamal could see indifference behind her cold demeanor. As Calloway stood at the prosecutor's table, he began weaving the narrative of the day, a tidy story of a man who had flipped a routine traffic stop into something more sinister. This is a simple case of an individual escalating a traffic stop into a physical altercation with law enforcement, he announced, his voice dripping with condescension. Jamal clenched his fists, anger boiling under the surface as he listened to the prosecutor describe him as combative and hostile. The words were a stinging betrayal of his character, a smooth presentation of lies accepted as truths simply because they wore badges. All of a sudden, Jamal was reminded that perceptions could easily shift based on skin color, and he was the one facing the brunt of that injustice. His lawyer, Thomas Rivera, who had battled his own demons within the overwhelming confines of a public defender's role, interrupted with passion. "Objection, Your Honor. There is no evidence that my client was aggressive." "Overruled," came Judge Holloway's disinterested reply. The casual dismissal pierced Jamal with dread. Rivera sighed, but pressed again. "Your Honor, the officers escalated the situation without just cause. There is no body camera footage showing my client acting aggressively." Calloway maintained his facade, waving the point away as if it were meaningless. Body cams were not operational at the time of the arrest, but the officers' statements are ample evidence, he said smoothly, as if rehearsed. Jamal inhaled slowly, attempting to stave off his rising fury. This wasn't just about him. It was about a system that remained terrified of accountability. He could hardly comprehend the absurdity of his situation. The officer's words were all that were needed to secure a conviction. As Driscoll took the stand, delivering his rehearsed lines with a cat-like ease, Jamal's heart raced. The defendant was combative from the start, he stated, the confidence rolling off him like armor. Each word felt like a dagger. Spun from deception, Kessler followed and nodded along, his body language exuding unwarranted certainty as he added, "We feared for our safety." Jamal's fury intensified. They were lying, and everyone in this room knew it. His fingers curled into fists, fighting every urge to lash out. Judge Holloway barely concealed her impatience, tapping her fingers like an impatient metronome, clearly uninterested in the truth. "Is there anything else, Mr. Rivera?" she asked. Rivera hesitated. He knew the judge's track record and how she wielded her power. The chances of her validating their arguments were slim, yet he stood firm. There was something bigger at play that demanded to be unearthed. Perhaps it was a last-ditch shot at justice. "Yes, Your Honor," he said resolutely. The defense calls Jamal Winslow to the stand. Jamal's heart plunged as all eyes turned to him. The weight of the courtroom felt heavier than before. The whispers faded into an endless echo as he made his way to the witness stand. He wasn't there to defend himself. He was there to reveal the truth. As he took his seat, the courthouse clerk swore him in. He could feel every gaze penetrating him, analyzing his every movement. "Mr. Winslow," Calloway began, that feigned air of dominance, once more dripping from his voice. "Would you say you complied with the officer's instructions during your traffic stop?" Jamal met his gaze with calm confidence. "I asked why I was being ordered out of my car." "That's not illegal," Calloway pressed. "And after multiple orders, you still didn't comply?" "I asked why I was being asked to step out," Jamal repeated, his voice steady, an unwavering gaze directed at Calloway, "which legally, I have the right to do." Calloway smirked, since Jamal's insistence on clarity was merely an annoyance to him. He turned away, shaking his head, feigning disappointment at Jamal's assertion of rights. "Your Honor, it is clear the defendant." But Jamal leaned forward, interrupting before Calloway could continue. "Before we go any further, I need to disclose something important." Silence descended, thick like fog rolling onto the bayou. Calloway hesitated, the sudden tension swiveling the courtroom to attention. "What are you talking about?" Jamal reached into his briefcase. Feeling the weight of the moment, he drew out his badge, the symbol of his position, a small rectangle that now felt monumental. "I'm Jamal Winslow," he declared, voice cutting through the hum of disbelief swirling around the courtroom. "Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Southern District." Gasps ricocheted through the audience. The atmosphere shifted dramatically, the tension morphing into something electric. The officers stiffened, exchanging glances filled with anxiety, the facade they had built crumbling with each breath. "Excuse me?" Calloway stammered, his confidence evaporating in an instant. Jamal's resolve intensified, emboldened by the truth he carried. "Did I stutter? This badge signifies who I am." The room hung suspended, and he felt everyone's attention coalesce around him. Judge Holloway, her expression now one of intrigue, stared at Jamal, and for the first time, it appeared she was contemplating the gravity of the moment unfolding before her. The courtroom was no longer a simple arena for a routine traffic stop. It was a battleground for something far greater, an indictment of broken systemic practices that needed to be exposed. The officers exchanged glances, their earlier bravado dissipating like mist in daylight as the magnitude of Jamal's revelation echoed throughout the courtroom. Calloway's stutter was a haunting reminder of the stakes. This was no longer a case of a black man against the police. It was about a government employee wrongfully apprehended, challenging the very core of authoritative power. "Would you like to amend your statements?" Judge Holloway asked, her tone firm, eyes sharp as she scrutinized the officers. Silence thickened, the weight of their insecurity palpable. They were floundering now, caught in the contradiction between their past actions and the present reality ushered in by Jamal's presence. This was the moment. His heart hammered in his chest as he sensed the shift in power dynamics. Their shield of authority, once unyielding, was cracking under the truth that had been tucked away for too long. "Your Honor," Jamal interjected, pressing his advantage, "I request the court pull the dispatch call logs from the night of my arrest. It could bring forth more evidence that they have violated protocol from the very beginning." He could feel the tension rise, shifting as Judge Holloway turned her gaze toward him. This was not just about examining evidence. It was a potential opening to exposing the cracks in the system. "Request granted," Holloway declared, but her expression remained analytical, as though she were weighing every implication. As Kessler and Driscoll fidgeted under the scrutiny of the courtroom, Jamal could see their confidence fading. They hadn't just landed in a hot seat. They were now under the scrutiny of a jury that demanded answers, and he planned to ensure they got them. In that moment, Jamal Winslow transformed from a mere defendant into a beacon of hope, ready to challenge everything that had been allowed to fester in darkness for too long. He had taken the first step toward reclaiming power, not just for himself, but for everyone who had been silenced, those whose stories had never seen the light of day. The complexities of the case were about to unfold, revealing a treachery that not only affected Jamal, but also the countless souls who had faced unyielding injustices hidden behind the guise of law and order. As the courtroom buzzed with anticipation, the echoes of a long-awaited battle began to resonate, leading Jamal down the pathway toward profound change. This was only the beginning. The fight was far from over. The courtroom's anticipation hung in the air as Judge Holloway instructed the clerk to retrieve the dispatch logs for the night of Jamal's arrest. The silence was heavy with unspoken tensions, the weight of potential revelations pressing down on everyone present. Jamal's request had not only shaken the officers, but had also piqued the judge's interest, her expression a mask of professional curiosity. As the minutes ticked by, the clerk returned with a stack of files, which she handed to Judge Holloway. The judge scanned the documents, her eyes moving with a speed and intensity that suggested she was searching for something specific. The room remained silent, the only sound the rustling of papers and the quiet hum of the courtroom's air conditioning. Finally, Judge Holloway looked up, her gaze locking onto the officers. "It appears there was no dispatch call made for a traffic stop on the night in question," she stated, her voice firm and without emotion. The officers exchanged nervous glances, their composure beginning to fray at the edges. Jamal watched them, a sense of vindication rising within him. This was just the beginning. The thread of deceit was starting to unravel. "Calloway," The prosecutor jumped to his feet. Your Honor, this doesn't necessarily mean... Judge Holloway raised a hand, silencing him. I've heard enough, Mr. Calloway. The lack of a dispatch call suggests that the stop was not procedurally sound. I want to see the body camera footage from that night. The officers shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting towards the back of the courtroom as if seeking an escape. Jamal's lawyer, Thomas Rivera, leaned forward, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. Your Honor, I believe the officers previously stated that their body cameras were not operational at the time of the arrest. Judge Holloway's gaze narrowed. I remember. And now, I'd like to know why. Clerk, please note that the court requests the maintenance records for the officers' body cameras for the past month. The clerk nodded, jotting down the request as the tension in the courtroom continued to build. Jamal could feel the momentum shifting, the tide turning in his favor. The officers' lies were being exposed, layer by layer, and it was only a matter of time before the truth came to light. As the judge began to deliberate, the courtroom erupted into a flurry of activity. The prosecutor conferred with the officers, their voices hushed but urgent. Jamal's lawyer leaned over to whisper something in his ear, a look of excitement on his face. The judge is not buying their story, Jamal. We might have a chance to get the charges dropped, Rivera whispered. Jamal nodded, a sense of hope rising within him. He had known that the system was flawed, but to see it play out like this was both infuriating and exhilarating. The fight was far from over, but for the first time, he felt like he was gaining ground. Judge Holloway banged her gavel, calling the courtroom to order. The court will reconvene in 1 hour. I expect the prosecution to have their evidence in order by then. And officers, I suggest you come prepared to explain the discrepancies in your statements. As the courtroom erupted into chaos, Jamal stood up, his eyes locked onto the officers. He could see the fear in their eyes, the realization that they were no longer in control. The tables had turned, and now it was their turn to face the music. The next hour was a blur of activity as Jamal and his lawyer prepared for the next phase of the trial. They pored over the evidence, looking for any inconsistencies in the officers' statements. The air was thick with tension as they worked, the weight of the outcome hanging precariously in the balance. As the courtroom reconvened, Jamal felt a sense of trepidation. What would the next hour bring? Would the officers' lies be exposed, or would they find a way to wriggle out of the truth? The judge's expression was stern, her eyes narrowing as she surveyed the courtroom. The prosecution may proceed, she stated, her voice firm. Calloway stood up, a look of determination on his face. Your Honor, we have new evidence that corroborates the officers' statements. We request that the court consider this new evidence. Judge Holloway raised an eyebrow. What is the nature of this evidence? Calloway hesitated before responding. A witness has come forward who places Mr. Winslow at the scene of the crime, acting in a manner consistent with the officers' statements. The courtroom erupted into chaos as Jamal's lawyer jumped to his feet. Your Honor, this is outrageous. We demand to know the identity of this witness and the nature of their testimony. The judge banged her gavel, calling the courtroom to order. The court will hear the witness's testimony. But, Mr. Calloway, be warned. If this witness's testimony is found to be false, the consequences will be severe. As the witness took the stand, Jamal felt a sense of unease. Who was this person, and what did they have to gain from testifying against him? The witness's eyes locked onto his, a look of recognition sparkling in their depths. And then it hit him, the realization that this witness was not just any witness, but someone from his past, someone who had a score to settle. The game had just changed, and Jamal was ready to play. The courtroom fell silent as the witness, a woman in her mid-30s with a determined look on her face, began to speak. I was there that night, she said, her voice steady. I saw Jamal Winslow at the scene of the crime, acting suspiciously. Jamal's lawyer leapt to his feet. Objection, Your Honor. This is hearsay and lacks corroboration. Judge Holloway raised an eyebrow. Continue, miss? Green, the witness replied. Emily Green. I was in a nearby apartment, and I saw Jamal through my window. He was pacing back and forth, talking to someone on the phone. Calloway nodded, a triumphant smile spreading across his face. "And did you see what he was saying?" Emily hesitated before responding. "I couldn't quite make it out, but it sounded like he was discussing something in a code." Jamal's lawyer shook his head. "This is ridiculous, Your Honor. The witness is speculating and making assumptions." Judge Holloway leaned forward. "Continue, Miss Green." Emily took a deep breath. "I didn't think much of it at the time, but when I saw the news about Jamal's arrest, I realized that I might have seen something important. I didn't want to come forward sooner, but I felt guilty for not speaking up earlier." The courtroom erupted into a cacophony of voices as the lawyers began to argue over the admissibility of Emily's testimony. Jamal watched the scene unfold, his mind racing with thoughts. He had been so focused on clearing his name that he had neglected to consider the possibility that someone from his past could come forward to testify against him. Emily Green was a name he hadn't heard in years, a woman he had dated briefly in college. As the commotion died down, Judge Holloway banged her gavel once more. "Enough! The court will take a short recess while we deliberate on the admissibility of Miss Green's testimony." As the courtroom emptied, Jamal's lawyer leaned over to whisper in his ear. "We need to know more about this witness, Jamal. Who is she, and why is she coming forward now?" Jamal's mind was racing with thoughts of Emily Green. What had driven her to come forward? Was she motivated by revenge or by a genuine desire to see justice served? The question echoed in his mind as he stood up to follow the bailiff out of the courtroom. He knew that his fate hung in the balance, and he was determined to uncover the truth about Emily Green and her motives. As they stepped out into the hallway, Jamal spotted Emily waiting for him. She looked nervous, fidgeting with her hands. "Jamal," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm so sorry. I know this isn't easy for you." He nodded curtly, unsure of how to respond. "What do you want, Emily?" She took a deep breath before speaking. "I want to tell you everything. About that night, about what I saw, and about what really happened." Jamal's eyes narrowed. "Go on." Emily glanced around nervously before leaning in closer. "It wasn't what you think it was," she whispered. "I know you're innocent, Jamal, and I'm here to help you prove it." Jamal's eyes locked onto hers, searching for any sign of deception. But all he saw was determination and a hint of fear. "Tell me more," he said finally. Emily nodded, her eyes darting around the hallway as if she feared being overheard. "Let's talk outside," she said finally. "Somewhere we can be alone." The chill of the corridor wrapped around Jamal as he followed Emily outside. The fresh air was sharp against his skin, a stark contrast to the heat of the courtroom. They walked a little distance from the building, seeking a quiet corner away from prying ears. The sun hung low in the sky, casting elongated shadows that seemed to whisper secrets of their own. "Jamal," Emily began, her voice trembling slightly, "what you need to understand is that there's more to that night than what you've been told. I saw things that the police don't know about, things that could help your case." Jamal crossed his arms, a mix of skepticism and curiosity bubbling within him. "What do you mean? Are you saying the police didn't get the full story?" Emily nodded. "Exactly. When I saw you, I also saw someone else, a man who was definitely not on the up and up. He was lurking in the shadows, making calls, and I think he might have been involved in whatever was going down that night." "Who was he? Did you get a look at him?" Jamal pressed. Emily hesitated, clearly recalling some old, painful memories. "I didn't recognize him at first. He was wearing a hoodie, and the streetlight wasn't bright enough to see his face. But I caught a glimpse of the car he drove, a dark sedan. The thing is, a few weeks later, I saw a social media post about a guy who had been arrested for dealing in that area. He had a scar on his cheek, just like the man I saw." Jamal's heart raced. This was the break he needed, but still felt cautious. "What's the point of bringing this up now? Why didn't you come forward sooner?" Emily looked away, guilt shadowing her features. "Because I didn't want to get involved. I thought you were guilty, and I didn't want to be dragged into it. But when I heard you were fighting for your freedom, that you were serious about proving your innocence, I knew I had to say something. It's been weighing on me ever since." Jamal ran a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders. "If what you're saying is true, that could change everything. But I need you to be certain. Will you testify in court?" Emily bit her lip, clearly torn. I want to, but I'm scared. If that man finds out I talked, I don't know what he might do. Jamal stepped closer, his expression softening. You have to trust that your voice can make a difference. We can't let fear hold us back from the truth. Just then, the flood of emotion was interrupted by the sharp sound of the courtroom's gavel resonating from behind them. The warning that the court would reconvene soon lingered in the air, urging them back inside. Listen, Emily, Jamal said urgently. I need you to think it over. This is a pivotal moment, not just for me, but for the truth. Get in touch, okay? She nodded, her eyes wide with both fear and determination. I will. And Jamal, I really hope you win this fight. With a final, lingering look, they parted ways. As Jamal walked back into the courtroom, his mind was a whirlwind of possibilities. If Emily came through, if she testified about what she had seen, it could be the lifeline he desperately needed. The atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted yet again. The judge sat with an expectant look. The prosecutors whispered urgently amongst themselves. Jamal took his seat at the table, each second stretching out like an eternity as the tension built in the air. Judge Holloway banged her gavel again, restoring order as she assessed the room. We will resume with the witness testimony. The prosecution may call their next witness, she declared. Jamal's heart pounded. This was it, the moment he had been fighting for. He desperately hoped that by the end of the day, he would be one step closer to unraveling the truth, reclaiming his freedom, and unmasking the shadows of deception that had loomed over him for too long. But as the courtroom doors opened and a new figure stepped inside, Jamal's heart dropped. Would this be another chance taken away? Or could this witness hold the key to his salvation?